Okay, good. So welcome to everyone, members of PRAXI, EAI International and Interlegal. There are still people joining us, but we'll let them in while we start. So we're really happy to welcome you for this webinar around labor law and new challenges in the current health situation, health, political, and economic situation. So today we'll have three speakers from our three different networks. I'll just let Jérôme from EAI introduce himself, and then Colin from Interlegal as well is going to introduce our speakers, the topics for today, and the three organizations. So Jérôme, if you want to say hello.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon. I'm Jerome from EAI International. It's lovely to see you all, and I hope you will enjoy the session and find it both helpful and interesting.
Good. So Colin is going to introduce the speakers, the topics, and the organizations. As I said, hope you'll have a great webinar. And I also forgot to say, we'll have a period of questions at the end of the meeting. So please wait till the end of the three presentations before asking questions. At the end, you can either open your mic to ask your question, or you can write it in the chat during the presentation. We'll read them at the end. So thank you for being there. And Colin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roseanne, and welcome to everybody today. It's a great privilege to be with you discussing such an important and interesting topic, and welcome to all of our guests and visitors from around the world, wherever you are, whether it's morning, afternoon or evening. We're very pleased to have you with us. I think I was really excited to hear about the topic for today. We know that for most organizations, its people are its most important asset, and one of its biggest challenges is finding the right people, managing people effectively, and also retaining people. And so therefore the topic seems today to be such an interesting and important one for us. And particularly, as we've seen, we know all about the challenges that have been laid before us from the pandemic and how that has changed in many ways the world of work. But there are also many other challenges at the moment, political and economic developments, for example, Brexit, for example, changes in governance in the United States, political developments in Asia, at Interlegal, we are a network of law firms. We are one of the longest established and most experienced networks, made up of independent firms, and we have members in 50 countries. And our membership and our network is based on professionalism and trust. And we're very pleased to be working today with our friends at EAI and at PRAXI Alliance. EAI is an association of independent chartered accountants represented in 60 countries around the world, with over 300 offices and over 2,800 employees and partners, and have been existing as a network for 35 years. And they've been working in partnership with Interlegal for about 10 years or so now. So we're great to be working with you. And also we're pleased to welcome friends from PRAXI Alliance, a network of independent executive search and selection firms located in more than 30 countries around the world. And here at Interlegal, we've recently entered into an agreement to work together with PRAXI Alliance. So we're very pleased to have everyone with us today. So thinking about this important topic, we have three excellent speakers. We have Soniya Singh from PRAXI Alliance, we have Patrick Van Rooij from EAI, and we have Alexandre Meyrieux from Interlegal. I'd like to introduce first to speak Soniya Singh from PRAXI Alliance. Soniya is the managing partner of S&S Associates, a search and selection firm based in New Delhi in India. And Soniya, as well as being managing partner of that firm, is also obviously a PRAXI Alliance member and is also, I understand, a member of the network's management committee. So I know that Soniya has some very interesting insights into the topic for today, and I'm very pleased to welcome you and to listen to your presentation. Thank you, Soniya.
Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about labor challenges in the post-COVID scenario. And since we represent the executive search industry, I'm going to really sort of focus more on how COVID has impacted talent acquisition and business as a consequence. As Peter Drucker famously once said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. It's been a full year and a half since the WHO declared COVID a global pandemic. Its impact on business has been catastrophic. So today we're going to try and understand how talent acquisition strategies have been disrupted, whether we continue to act on them with yesterday's logic or have we adapted and moved on to new and successful ways of hiring. Next, please. To better understand the hiring changes and challenges of the time, we studied the Global Hiring Landscape Survey, which was done by HireView and was a survey across 1,100 hiring leaders in key markets. And the key findings are, and the very obvious one is technology's rapidly expanding role in hiring. So organizations have been forced into rapid digital transformation in 2020, and one finds that this trend of relying on technology is going to only continue going forward. The strategic integration of technology is no longer a nice to have, but a must to have for hiring teams. So just to give you examples of the kind of technology integration into hiring, I mean, we have applicant tracking systems, we have AI-powered chatbots, etc., which are all part of the hiring process these days. Let's talk about the more ubiquitous remote working, which we get to see on a daily basis today. Last year, the workplace was more of an in-office experience, which moved to a fully remote experience once COVID hit. And the future we now find is settling into a hybrid model. So remote work has become the new normal even for companies that were completely and largely closed to this model earlier. In the US, for example, it's expected that 26.7% of workers will be fully remote by the end of 2021 compared to 12% pre-COVID. Next, please. The next trend that I'm going to talk about is a move to focus on process efficiencies. So in 2020, hiring teams moved away from performing administrative tasks towards creating engaging, happy hiring experiences for candidates. Moving forward, hiring leaders want to spend less time on scheduling and more time on candidate engagement. The key takeaway here is that technology is the new team member in the room. When hiring teams are overwhelmed and understaffed, instead of adding headcount, they consider automation instead. Let's talk about the next trend, which is really a resumed focus on global expansion. The business world will never be the same again after 2020. Because of travel bans, many companies had to put their global expansion plans on hold. While the future is still uncertain, But I think we're looking forward to going back to a focus on global expansions. So building out global teams and taking on more remote workers can be a strategic way to diversify and prepare for the future. The next trend that we're likely to see is a focus on hiring in emerging markets. Next, please. So 77% of recruitment professionals have cited skill shortages as a top hiring challenge, prompting companies to look beyond their own borders. Talent shortages in home countries do push people to look at various options and particularly focus on emerging markets. So in a particular report that we looked at, where 20 major economies were studied, India was the only economy expected to maintain a talent surplus in 2025 and 2030. Other developed markets will be hit hard by talent shortages and will need to look to emerging markets to find the talent that they seek. Next, we would have all seen that there's been a major push towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is DEI. We've all heard about this. It's a recent trend. And many leaders who previously took a passive approach to DEI in the past are now focusing on this in a very big way. The opportunity for meaningful change is here. The future of hiring must focus on equity. Diversity is no longer a novelty in the business world. Employees with different backgrounds and cultures can bring new insights and perspectives to the company. In addition to cultural diversity, a good balance of gender, age, belief systems, and experience levels can help create a truly diverse team. Diversity benefits companies in many ways and improves employee morale. 90% of employees who work for a diverse company report higher levels of happiness, inclusion, and trust. And they are far more likely to trust their own leadership team for sure. Next, please. Next. There is a more flexible approach to required qualifications as a new trend that we're seeing. So if you're struggling to find qualified candidates, this year is the year to consider relaxing your standards. This doesn't mean that you should lower the bar in terms of candidate skill sets, but it could mean removing some requirements for degrees or certifications that may stand between your company and genuinely talented individuals in your field. So the focus seems to be on skills over formal qualifications. Focus on agility and teachability is really a new trend. So if you look at it, an evolving global economy, increasing digitalization, and the challenges presented by the pandemic have all demonstrated the importance of keeping businesses agile. So companies wish to hire employees who are willing and able to learn new skills and allow their jobs to evolve as needed. So therefore, reskilling is no longer just a good idea, it's a necessary step to economic recovery. The most in-demand skill is the ability to understand and prepare for multiple business scenarios. Other skills include innovation, dealing with complexity and ambiguity, and managing opposing views. Next, please. There is an emphasis on online communication. Just as we are collaborating and communicating on this platform, virtual communication tools are in, and recruiting teams are looking for the best tools that match their needs. And they would also need to be up to speed on video conferencing etiquette, which may differ from country to country. Next, please. There's also a spotlight on recruitment marketing. Sorry, are we on the same one? Yeah. Recruitment marketing is, you would have noticed that the job market is becoming increasingly employee-driven. And the use of recruitment marketing software is being used by companies, which draws upon marketing strategy to improve the recruitment process and helps companies engage and appeal to top talent. And the last trend that I'd like to talk about is the increased focus on international recruiting using EORs. So global expansion, was meant for large-size companies at some point. And now even small companies are broadening their reach and using employer of record or EOR to help. So businesses can, of any size, whether they're large or small, can hire an EOR to get them to help expand their business into new markets without having to establish their own business entity in those specific markets. So an EOR is, sorry, I haven't really finished. An EOR is an entity which will have a business entity in the country that you intend to expand into. It will understand how to comply with employment laws there, and it's prepared to add your employees to their payroll right away. So this is a way of big and small companies entering new markets, international markets, and getting started right away without having the onus of understanding, setting up offices from scratch and understanding what are the hiring trends that they have to look at and what are the employment laws that they have to comply with. Okay, next please. So now let's quickly look at the hiring trends in a nutshell. Let's start with understanding what is the talent availability like once COVID is hit and business processes have changed. So talent has finally become mobile since COVID has entered the business scene. Last year, everything was very quiet and people were, staying indoors, but talent is finally mobile now. Access to talent through digital platforms has skyrocketed for companies. However, at the same time, you see a massive shortage of skilled talent due to strong economic growth. The US market, for example, is faced with the most challenging talent market in the last 70 years. Functions like technology, finance, healthcare, engineering are most hit by this shortage. There's a very strong competition for top talent, and companies have to fight hard and often manage to retain outgoing talent. Price points have also gone up, so it's a demand and supply situation. Gig workers are in. Next, please. So is there a change in the candidate mindset given the change of the way businesses are operating now? There's a use of virtual platforms which has increased the willingness of candidates to engage and get into exploratory mode to identify new opportunities for themselves. But at the same time, candidates have also become pickier. They look for good work-life balance, family-friendly work environment, flexible work hours, social securities, and employee benefits. There's also a changed perspective regarding return to office. They want smart working or work from home at least 2 days a week. And there's also a higher percentage of candidates refusing job offers at the end of the process. So is there a change in the client mindset as well? Most certainly. The war for talent is back. Clients are looking for candidates with greater agility, flexibility, initiative, and a proactive mindset. Clients are definitely more sensitive to employees' family needs. They display greater openness to remote working and multi-country teams. And since the demand for talent is escalating, clients realize they have to work harder to attract and retain top talent. Clients are also looking for greater diversity in talent for long-term sustainability of businesses. So DEI is definitely in. Some companies that are badly hit by COVID do have tight budgets, but simultaneously do loosen purse strings for the right candidates owing to strong competition. Austria and other parts of Western Europe are reporting massive shortfall of IT professionals. Clients in the US too are desperate to get the right talent, so it's a seller's market all the way for the right skills. So clients are in a bit of a tough spot at this point. Next, please. So are there any additional constraints while sourcing talent given the new way of doing business? I think so. If you look at online interviewing and assessment, remote negotiations and closures, all these are happening without face-to-face meetings. When we do our assessment of candidates in person, there's a lot of body language, etc., that we try and read and assess the candidate through that. So all of that is missing in online interviewing. So it is tough going. The candidate interview experience, the organizational processes and decision-making, company values, etc., are all facing greater scrutiny by candidates who wish to align with companies that are considered deemed more reliable and more capable. Willingness to relocate has decreased, while mobility has increased, but the willingness to relocate has decreased. Candidates look for greater job security and significant salary increases, so cost of doing business is going up. Top talent is being very picky and in some cases, as in the US, leaving the market entirely, creating a vacuum. Some of the earlier constraints that existed have exited. Let's check out what those are. There are no more face-to-face meetings, at least not with the frequency that used to happen earlier. So remote working and use of platforms like Zoom, etc., are making it less time-consuming to meet and assess candidates. So while it's slightly more difficult, but at the same time, it's less time-consuming. Client meetings and business development is also done online. There's less or no travel, and hence there's a saving in terms of time and money. There are no geographical barriers. You can do business with candidates and clients in any part of the world. So the globe has really shrunk and the barriers have disappeared. Geographical proximity or willingness to relocate as per company preference are no longer constraints. So earlier, if top talent was really looking at moving to a particular location and chose to sort of back out because of the relocation, the company was stuck. But now, those constraints no longer exist. And in a lighter vein, less time is invested in office politics. There's more focus on actual work. That's all from me. Thank you very much for your time and kind attention.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for that presentation today. It's been a really interesting introduction into many of the key challenges that we're seeing in the world of employment. It's very interesting to see how you highlighted the influence of technology, but also the influence and change in practices by both recruiters and also potential employees. And your presentation was very clear on how both parties are having to be more flexible now about how they approach both finding employment and finding talent and maintaining talent going forward. So thank you very much for that. You've raised some very interesting topics, and I'm sure there'll be questions to come later on about your presentation. So thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce our second speaker. Our second speaker is Alexandre Meyrieux from the Interlegal member law firm Audion Avocat in Paris. So we've moved from India to France now. Alexandre is a long established and experienced lawyer with expertise in commercial law, employment law, and international law. And Audion Avocat has been a strong member of the Interlegal network of law firms and works effectively with many of our members. Alexandre is also the chairman of our specialist group on labour and employment law. So he has particular expertise in this topic. And so we look forward to hearing Alexandre's presentation on some of the challenges and developments that affect the legal environment in the current economic and political and health context. So thank you very much, Alexandre, and I'm pleased to welcome you and to listen to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin, for the introduction. So in March 2020, the World Health Organization declared a public health emergency of international concern, which is the highest level of alert under international law. The world of work has been deeply affected by the global coronavirus pandemic, labor law, which is aiming to govern the relationships between employees and employers, has two distinct and opposing purposes, which it strives to reconcile: social purpose and an economic purpose. Indeed, the health crisis added a new global challenge to labor law, the one considering public health. In our professional practice, our clients became very close to our firms with new questions that had to be answered quickly, even so we were experiencing an unprecedented situation. Initially, we had to find answers in the existing legislative texts, which were often inappropriate to the situation, and then apply new provisions taken in a hurry without considering the plenty of present cases. It's a time of innovation for lawyers. For this webinar, we try to cross-check the information with our Interlegal colleagues and see what was happening around the world in terms of labor law. And I want to thank you, Emmeline, who helped me a lot in the preparation of this webinar. In general, we were able to see that in the midst of a diversity of cultures and social models, our clients' questions were very similar. Those questions can be divided into several themes, 4 themes: telework, employer's obligation, coronavirus as a cause of modification or termination of the employment contract, and finally, vaccination. So first, a few words about work from home. To face the COVID-19 epidemic, urgent and short-term measures have been put in place around the world to avoid business closures, job losses, and drops in income. One of the major labor law responses has been the development of telework, particularly because of the lockdown of populations for a certain period. COVID-19 crisis has therefore accelerated some trends, in particular, digitalization and the shift to telework. When the telework was discussed, the first question was whether an employer could force employees to work from home. And regardless of the country, the unanimous answer is yes. The questions from our clients were focused on whether it was necessary to maintain the same working conditions as those applied in ordinary times. In particular, the conditions of remuneration remained the same. Another question from our clients: does the employer have to pay teleworking expenses? Teleworking is now a common practice. Everybody teleworks now when it's possible, and each company determines with their employees how is it going to be implemented. Time of innovation. Second point, what are the consequences of the COVID on the employment contract? Employers have also questioned our firms about the possibility to cut wage, change working hours, or even terminate employment contracts without any further reason, simply because the epidemic has occurred. In Spain, for example, the debate has been whether is it possible to objectively dismiss a worker during the pandemic due to COVID or not. There are still several court decisions. Some of them declare the dismissals to be fair, and others declare them to be unjustified. So in Spain, we are waiting for the Supreme Court. In Thailand, the pandemic can be considered as a cause for economic dismissal, but employees are still entitled to ask for compensation during the notice period. In India, there is presently no mandate on the employers against the provision of retrenchment or layoff. This has been a subject of litigation, which highlights the issue pertaining to the termination of employees due to reduced business during COVID-19. In some countries, in order to avoid redundancies and to financially help companies, I think about UK, France, or Germany, for example, they have introduced a system of short-time working, also called, I guess, Jim, you can tell me, furlough in England thing. So short-time working, which allows employees to maintain a salary level while their jobs are suspended. States take care of salaries instead of the employers in some countries. The case in France. The implementation of these systems has helped to save jobs. No collapse, no economic collapse in countries. However, what will happen when this support will no longer be given? Next step in France, end of October. The third point concerns employers' obligation. The lockdown put in place in many countries has generated specific risks and questions that companies had to answer very quickly. Subsequently, the gradual deconfinement within companies, which does not constitute a true return to normalcy, has also led to liability issues. New challenges in the workplace are thus raised on a daily basis. Several preventive measures which fit the different sectors of activity have been put in place, such as physical distancing, the wearing of masks, more frequent washing of hands and surfaces, and exclusion of symptomatic people from the workplace. COVID-19 has created a new risk that may expose managers to criminal liability. From an employment law perspective, company directors are generally subject to a safety obligation. So our clients ask us about the possibility, for example, for an employee to come back to work when teleworking is not possible, or about the measures to implement in case of the employer's physical presence. For example, in the field of construction activities. The question also arose whether the employer should provide free tests to his employees. In Germany, for example, to reduce the professional risk of COVID infection, the employer must give its employees, except if they exclusively work at home, a born test at least twice per calendar week. In France, the Ministry of Labor has published a detailed guide for employers adapted to the different sectors of activity. The employer must also ensure that his department's risk assessment is consistently adapted and transcribed in the single risk assessment document. This update should identify work situations in which the conditions for transmitting COVID may be fulfilled, such as contact with an infectious person. Though it's very important for employer to assess the risk. For example, if someone is infected by the coronavirus and that the social security dealt with it as a work accident, inexcusable fault of the employer can be held out. In criminal matters as well, the law penalizes both the employer's fault and the fault of an employee in cases of exposure through negligence or absence of measures. In addition to the civil and criminal liability incurred by employers, there is also the question of the consequences if an employee does not comply with this instruction. What about the employee? In Quebec, they are very hard. For example, as early as December 2020, several judges confirmed the sanctions taken by employers against employees who violate the measures taken. For example, an arbitral judge upheld an employer's decision not to pay an employee during quarantine on the ground that the employee has contravened government directives. I say directives, not compulsory measures, by deliberately associating with a person who was in isolation. So the consequences and the response depends on the different countries. Finally, and last points, the vaccination. No one can escape the debate on compulsory vaccination. Compulsory vaccination is mainly imposed on healthcare staff. This is the case in France, in Italy. However, dismissal can only take place after several warnings. In the UK and Greece, vaccination is compulsory for employees in retirement homes, including non-medical staff. In Malta, the employer cannot impose vaccination on his employees. In the United States, an increased number of firms are imposing to all or part of their employees to prove they are vaccinated. And some organizations are firing employees who don't comply with a vaccine mandate. For instance, a federal judge in Texas recently ruled in favor of a large hospital system that chose to fire employees who refused to get inoculated. In Brazil, a recent court decision rendered by Sao Paulo's labor court also validated a dismissal for refusing to vaccinate a healthcare worker. For almost a year and a half, companies have had to apply a multitude of new regulations and government recommendations in a hurry and sometimes at a forced march, causing a good number of misunderstandings among employees, but also employers. As a lawyer, we are here to assist employers and employees in trying to understand the exceptional rules that are applied during this huge health crisis period. As a lawyer, we act as a vaccine against uncertainty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, for your fascinating and insightful presentation. I've learned so much today from both of our first speakers about the challenges and issues facing both employers and employees in more recent times. And it was very interesting to hear Alexandre highlighting some of the key aspects of some of these developments, for example, teleworking and support for business, approach to health and safety, and obviously the vaccine as well. And it's very interesting to see how different countries have approached these challenges, and also to see where there are similarities and also differences. So thank you very much for that, Alexandre. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure that many of you will have further questions. Please put them in the chat or ask them at the end when we have our question and answer time. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome our final speaker, Patrick Van Rooij. Patrick is from the firm Graham Smith and Partners, an EAI member based in the Netherlands, and international tax specialists. Patrick is a very experienced advisor in this field, and he's a member of the Dutch Association of Tax Advisors and the Association for Dutch Tax Knowledge, and has spent many years working with businesses, both large and medium sized, both in the Netherlands and overseas. So I'm very pleased to welcome you, Patrick, and we are looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin, for the introduction. We have seen that with the global pandemic, that there was a huge impact on our lives. We can safely conclude that some of us have been sick, some of us have lost loved ones, and most of us, and that's maybe a good part of this whole thing, is that most of us spend a lot more time at home with our families. We saved a lot of money because we couldn't travel that much, we couldn't go on holidays. We did a lot of redecoration of our houses. And as we can see with this seminar, we have discovered that working from home can be very efficient by using electronic meeting tools. So just imagine 1.5 years ago, no one of us heard of Teams or Zoom or Google Meet, and now we're using it every day. Due to COVID, we have seen both an increase and a decrease in global mobility. On the business side, it was mainly a decrease, but on a personal side, we have seen some very interesting increases. Business travel decreased significantly, not just due to canceled conferences, but simply because it was not possible to meet with clients. Sales reps couldn't make house calls. We made a lot of savings on the travels. CO2 footprint reduced significantly. And for me personally, the last 18 months, I hardly had any traffic jams coming to the office. So that was nice as well. On a personal level, COVID has also impacted the way we work. I think we all have someone in our firm who at one stage asked, listen, if I have to work at home, does it matter that much if I'm really working from home or from a holiday house somewhere in the world? It made me jealous in some situations. We have had cases where Dutch residents who used to work abroad during the weeks, flying into London, flying into Paris, Switzerland, all of a sudden had to stay home and work. We can not really imagine that this has an impact, but for tax purposes, these changes can have a huge impact on the personal taxation of the employee, as well as on the corporate taxation. Some companies explicitly forbade their employees to work anywhere else than at home. So they simply said, well, no, you can't go to a Caribbean island to work there. And some employees were very eager to get back to the office as soon as possible because it was interesting from a tax perspective. Well, I'm going to discuss that briefly during the next 10 minutes on some specific areas. The employee's taxation is simply decided by the place where he lives. It's the basic rule. You're taxed in the country where you live. But if you perform your duties in another country, that other country will think otherwise. It will say, okay, you're working here, you're earning your income here, so we tax your income here. When we have double tax treaties, that's solved very easily. You're taxed in a country where you live, unless you spend your working days somewhere else. And then we have one exception to that main rule, and that's the 183-day rule, which is, by the way, the most misunderstood rule in international tax law. So be careful when you read this. The home country can tax exclusively if the employee spends less than 183 days in that other country, and his wages are not carried by or paid on behalf of an employer in that country. Just imagine in your own profession, if you need to travel for business to meet with a client in another country, of course you will not be taxed in that country. But if you're seconded to that country and your firm charges a fee to the firm where you're seconded to, you will be taxed in that country. simply for the reason that your expenses are at that moment paid by the other material employer. So that's on the employees level. When you look at the employer, having an employee all of a sudden changing the place where he works also can have an impact, especially if that location is considered a permanent establishment. The permanent establishment constitutes a taxable base for corporate income tax purposes, but also for other tax purposes, for wage-based holding tax purposes. Just imagine. That creates tax liabilities, but also compliance requirements, and sometimes not meeting compliance requirements can be more costly than simply paying the tax you owe. A PE is a fixed place of business through which the business of an enterprise is wholly or partially carried on. Well, a fixed place can be easily determined. If you rent an office and stick a plate to the wall or have a production facility. But keep in mind, a hotel room can also constitute a fixed place of business. Even if only a small part of the turnover is generated from that PE, there can be tax consequences. So an employee who spends a lot of time in a hotel room in another country, making huge sales from that hotel room, can cause a taxable presence of your company in that country. It's far less tax than you would think. Just imagine, I've seen a case where an owner of a business where all his people were working from home simply said, well, I can spend the next 6 months in the south of France in my house there and run my company from there. Well, that can create a permanent establishment in France because he's actually running his business from that other country. And we've seen in Sonia's presentation that IT personnel is very hard to get. And sometimes you can think, okay, I don't have to have the IT person here in my country. He can do it from a distance. Be very careful, because depending on what he does or how many people are working there in that country, that could also create a PE. Do we have the next slide? This is not a unique situation, by the way. We can all be jealous of it. The next slide. Their dream shouldn't become a nightmare. For the employee, he should be sure that if he works from a beach or another country, it does not cause him to be taxed in that country. He stays taxed in the country where he came from. If his presence in that country would create a PE and his expenses could be attributed to that PE, his employer will also have an issue for reporting and paying taxes in that country. I know situations where the presence of an employee exceeding a certain threshold causes a PE by definition in some countries, which, by the way, are Caribbean countries, so don't be too happy to go there. Can I have the other one? Next slide, please. Here's another part of the equation, working from home. And we all have seen this situation. What we see here in the Netherlands, for instance, in the border regions, is that a lot of Dutch people work for Belgian or German resident employers. So they simply are cross-border workers. But during the pandemic, they had to stay home. When you go back to the principal rule, where someone is taxed in the other country if he performs his duties there, if someone is working for a Belgian employer, but works from his own home, he's no longer working in Belgium. So his tax treatment all of a sudden changes completely. He will be subject to tax in the Netherlands instead of in Belgium, where his employer is resident. If you then imagine that that employer is unaware of this, is still withholding and paying Belgian taxes, at the end of the year, when the person is reporting his taxes in the Netherlands, has to pay again in the Netherlands. And has to wait until he gets his refund from the Belgian tax authorities to solve this. Well, fortunately, in some cross-border cases, there have been additional arrangements made with those countries, between those countries. So, for instance, the Netherlands has made some arrangements with Belgium and Germany. But I had a situation where a person used to travel to Switzerland every week, and he's now taxed in 2 countries, and we have to fight to get back his taxes from the other country. Biggest issue here is whether the tax authorities of those 2 countries can agree on the situation having changed or not. And that's basically the main takeaway from this presentation. It's quite logical, but if facts change, the tax treatment can change as well. And in international situations that can have huge repercussions, even when there is a tax treaty, the interpretations can still be different. So be careful about that. Thank you all. I think we'll give it back to Roseanne for the question.
Thank you, Patrick, for that fantastic presentation. It's being somebody who is living in England, the idea of an office on the beach looks very attractive indeed. So, but thank you for highlighting some of the challenges that the current business climate has really brought into focus. Particularly interesting to hear about employees who are living near the borders and would have worked in, perhaps would live in Netherlands and work in Belgium, but now they're working in the Netherlands because they're working from home. So very interesting to hear about that and to think about the challenges for individuals and for businesses, and most importantly to make sure we keep a regular review of everything and make sure we are doing the right things. So thank you very much for that, Patrick. So at this point, I'd like to hand back to Roseanne. Remember, you can post your questions in the chat, or indeed in due course come on video as well, I imagine. So I'll hand back to Roseanne, who will facilitate the questions. But most of all, thank you to all of our speakers for your fantastic presentations. Back over to you, Roseanne.
Good. So thank you again, everyone. As I said in the chat, it was really interesting, even for a non-lawyer recruiter and tax advisor. So thank you. We're now ready to take questions. So you can either raise your hands through the reactions button, sorry, at the bottom of your screen. You can also open your mic or write your question in the chat. So we already have a first one from our member at Interlegal in the USA. It is a question for Patrick from William Bloom. So Patrick, where an employee works in a different country for his employer's his employer's location, is there a danger that he will be double taxed, or would there be treaty protection?
There is a danger that he will be double taxed, and in most cases, treaty offers possibilities to prevent that double taxation. But it really depends on the actual situation. Like I just explained, we had a situation where someone traveled to Switzerland on Monday and returned to the Netherlands on Friday. And before COVID, he was taxed in Switzerland and was supposed to be taxed in Switzerland because he was employed by a Swiss employer and working in Switzerland. But due to COVID, he's been working from his home in the Netherlands since March of last year. That causes him to perform his duties not in the other country, perform his duties in the Netherlands. He is taxable in the Netherlands, should not be taxable anymore in Switzerland, but his Swiss employer still withheld his Swiss taxes. So now we have to fight the Swiss tax authorities to get back his pay because they say, well, he would have worked in Switzerland, so we consider him still as having worked in Switzerland during the pandemic. So that's a treaty interpretation. So the treaty is quite strict in this. The treaty allocates the taxation rights to the Netherlands, but the Swiss simply say, this is a very special situation, and we consider him to have worked in Switzerland as if there would not have been any pandemic. So here's a genuine risk for double taxation.
Good, thank you, Patrick. Is there any other questions? You can either raise your hand. Okay, good. We have a question for Soniya and Alexandre from Jim, right? Our member at Interlegal in the UK. So Jim is asking, we heard from Alexandre that different countries, even within the European Union, offer different state support and have different rules. Example on vaccinations. Do either of you see a drift towards moving employees? Soniya and Alexandre, I don't know if one of you wants to answer first. Maybe ladies first with Soniya.
Sorry, I haven't really understood the question. So, can we have Jim just repeat that?
Allow me to rephrase then. Because states are taking a different approach to a variety of matters, I was wondering whether you'd seen any evidence of, for example, them saying they will move employees and cease hiring in jurisdiction A to then start hiring in jurisdiction B because of either state support for COVID or COVID-related matters.
Yes,
we haven't really seen.
Oh, go on, Soniya.
Okay, we haven't really seen that much in India, so I won't be able to really comment about other parts of the world. So go ahead, Alexander.
No, I've seen a drift. What do you mean about kind of drift? You mean for the employers to hire people in a good state which support salaries? Is that your question, Jim?
Exactly, yeah.
Maybe, but so in fact, from the point of view from France, I guess that most of the employers prefer to go to France because they say that the states will support the salaries. But for other countries, I don't know.
So have you seen employers coming to France because of the French state?
I said no, not 1 year and a half. So I think
okay.
A little bit too short to have an analysis about that.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you, Alexandre and Soniya. Is there any other questions? You can either in the chat or if you want to just open your mic. You can also send your questions to our speakers. Maybe dear speakers, write your emails in the chat. So if you want to note each speaker's email, you can email them in a few days if a question pop-ups to your mind. Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Alexandre. And do we have a question? I hear a microphone. Good. No? Okay, good. So if there's no more question, I want to thank you all for your participation in this event. I also want to thank our speakers, Alexandre, Soniya, and Patrick. Also, thanks to Colin and Jérôme for their help, and to our friend Sherry and Zai and all the PRAXI team. So it was a pleasure to see you all today. It was our first event with PRAXI and Eura Audit, EAI. Happy to see you all. I hope we'll have the chance to organize other meetings with the PRAXI, Interlegal, and EAI. And yeah, so if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to contact us by email or on LinkedIn. So that's it. Jérôme or Colin, do you have something to say before we? Or Sherry and Sai, do you want to say something?
No, maybe just say goodbye. It was nice spending some time with all of you, and we look forward to further collaborations.
Good.
Yes, for me also, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to our speakers, fantastic presentations, and we look forward to seeing you all again at a similar event in the future.
Good.